بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Last week we mentioned a few things about Abbad Bin-Bishr Radiallahu Anhu. The last thing we mentioned before we ended the session was when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam established ties of akhuwa, brotherhood between the Muhajirin and Ansar. So amongst the Muhajirun, there were two people, Abu Hudhayfa and Salim Mawla Abi Hudhayfa Radiallahu Anhuma. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tied their knot of brotherhood with Abbad bin Bishr Radiallahu Anhu. So he was responsible for taking care of their needs. And it's ajib to note that coincidentally, they also happened to die together in the Battle of Yamama in the 12th year of Hijri. Inshallah, we'll talk about that later. Going on from there, it seems from the ahadith that the Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'in had immense respect for Abbad bin Bishr. Even though he's not a very well-known Sahabi, but among the Sahaba themselves, he had a very high status. Because nobody would name their son after a person unless that person has a high rank in your heart. You have respect for them. And you want your son to be like them, therefore you name your son after them. So among one of the great Sahaba was Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu anhu. We all know Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu anhu, the son of Zubayr ibn al-Awwam from the Ashara Mubashara. Many ahadith narrated by Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu anhuma. Inshallah, we may talk about him in another session. But Abdullah bin Zubayr radiallahu anhu, amongst his many different sons that he had, one of them was Abbad ibn Abdullah. And Abbad ibn Abdullah, as he grew older, his father would constantly remind him that the reason I gave you the name Abbad is Wallahi ma sammani abi Abbadan illa bihi. He says that Wallahi, the reason my father named me Abbad was because of Abbad bin Bishr. So Abdullah bin Zubair, his own father is Zubair, but he names his son after Abbad. And Zubair ibn al-Awwam, Abdullah bin Zubair's father, was from the Ashara Mubashara. And I'm sure there are many other great Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'in Abdullah bin Zubair looked up to, who he wanted to name his son after. But he found Abbad bin Bishr, which means that he was esteemed in the eyes of the Sahaba, had a very high status. So Abbad ibn Abdullah ibn Zubair Radiallahu Anhum was named after Abbad bin Bishr. Also, Umar ibn Khattab Radiallahu Anhu had an immense respect for him, a lot of trust in him. And I say this based on an incident which I want to share with you. It's an incident which you may have heard, and it's Surah Munafiqun was revealed about regarding this incident. So it's a very long story. I'm just going to cut it short and summarize it. So there was Zayd ibn Arqam radiallahu anhu, Sahabi by the name of Zayd ibn Arqam. He was a very young Sahabi, about 10, 12 years old. He was sitting amongst a group of people. Among them were Sahaba and Munafiqun. One of those Munafiqun was the chief of the Munafiqun. His name was Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Sulul. So he made a statement. He said, when we go back to Medina, لَيُخْرِجَنَّ الْأَعَزُّ مِنْهَا الْأَذَلُّ. The honorable amongst us will exile the wretched ones amongst us. And by honorable, he was referring to himself. And by the wretched, na'udhu billah, he was referring to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Zayd ibn Arqam radiallahu anhu was a young Sahabi. He heard this. He came straight to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, Ya Rasulullah, this is what Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Sulul just said. Now there's a long story behind that. We can talk about that at another time as well. But when Zayd ibn Arqam came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at that time Umar ibn Khattab was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar ibn Khattab. So it's mentioned, فَسَمِعَ ذَلِكَ زَيْدُ بْنِ أَرْقَمْ فَمَشَى بِهِ إِلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم وَذَلِكَ عِنْدَ فَرَاغِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم مِنْ غَزْوَتِهِ. So this was Zayd ibn Arqam came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam right at the end of the Ghazwa. And he informed him, at that time Umar ibn Khattab was sitting with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, Ya Rasulullah, Mur bihi Abbad bin Bishr ibn Waqsh falyaqtulhu. Give the order to Abbad bin Bishr to have the honor of killing this kafir who made the statement against you. Why did he specifically choose Abbad bin Bishr amongst all the great Sahaba? One of the things we know for sure is that this means that Umar ibn Khattab had a lot of trust in Abbad bin Bishr not being amongst the munafiqun. Because he's assigning him, he's asking Rasulullah to assign him to kill a munafiq, which means in his eyes, he was a trusted sahabi of Rasulullah himself. Otherwise, if he had suspicion that he himself was a munafiq, if Umar ibn Khattab had suspicion that Abbad bin Bishr was a munafiq, why would he ask Rasulullah to assign him to this task? He would be fearful that he would go and tell Abdullah ibn Sulul to go and run off before you get killed by me because I've been assigned for this task. So, Umar ibn Khattab had full trust in Abbad bin Bishr Radiallahu Anhu. And this is not the first time Umar ibn Khattab did this. There's other occasions where he specifically appointed Abbad bin Bishr to specific tasks, which tells you the level of trust that he had in him. But Rasulullah's response to Umar ibn Khattab on this suggestion was, he said, كيف يا عمر إذا تحدث الناس أن محمدا يقتل أصحابه ولكن أذن بالرحيل. O Umar, if I do this and I allow Abbad bin Bishr to go and execute Abdullah ibn Sulul, tomorrow people will say Muhammad killed his companions. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The Arabs will say he killed his own companions. They don't know who's a Sahabi and who's not a Sahabi, or who's a Munafiq, who's not a Munafiq. They just know this man was one of the companions and something happened and he just went and killed them. Right? Now, do you think Rasulullah was worried about his image? Or was he worried about his mission? He's worried about his mission. It would affect his mission. The mission of spreading the deen. People will say, okay, if I accept Islam and I become a companion of Rasulullah, but he did this to one of his own companions, he would be fearful of accepting Islam and would become distrustful. And it would create a level of distrust, ruin the reputation of Rasulullah, which would decrease the number of people accepting Islam. So it's not about image, it was about mission work. Right? Then Rasulullah said, Adhan bir Rahil. Give the order, let the caravan go on, because this incident happened while they were on their way back from a ghazwa and they were very near to Medina Munawwara. Anyhow, so the fact that Umar ibn Khattab chose who? Abbad bin Bishr Radiallahu Anhu, and brought up his name in front of Rasulullah tells you his connection with Abbad bin Bishr. There's a narration by Aisha Siddiqa Radiallahu Anha. Very interesting. She says there's 3 people from the clan of, does anybody remember which clan he was from? We mentioned it last week in the session. Which clan was he from? We know he was from the tribe of Banu Aus, but he was from the clan of Banu Abdul Ashhal. Banu Abdul Ashhal. So Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha says in this rawaya, she says there's 3 people from the clan of Banu Abdul Ashhal. لم يكن بعد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أحد أفضل منهم. There was no one after Rasulullah who was more virtuous and righteous than them. Subhanallah. In the eyes of Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha, there is no one greater amongst the Sahaba after Rasulullah than these 3 people. And they were all from the same clan of Banu Abdul Ashhal, which tells you how great Banu Abdul Ashhal was, that 3 people within their own ranks were the highest rated in the eyes of Aisha Siddiqa amongst all the Sahaba. Who were they? Number 1, Sa'ad bin Mu'adh. We mentioned about him last week. The Arsh of Rahman was shaken up upon the death of Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu. Ihtazza lahu Arsh al-Rahman. Number 2, Usayd ibn Hudayr. Inshallah, maybe our next session will be about Usayd ibn Hudayr. Very great and interesting Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And number 3, Abbad bin Bishr. These 3 Sahaba all hailed from Banu Abdul Ashal, and according to Aisha Siddiqa, are the greatest people on the face of the earth after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Subhanallah. Banu Abdul Ashal. I came across another narration about Banu Abdul Ashal just to tell you that this clan that Abbad Bin-Bishr hailed from was a very, very special clan. Every other clan, every other tribe in Medina Munawwara from the Ansar had some munafiqun in it. Every single one. From Banu Khazraj within their clans, from Banu Aus within their clans. The only one clan amongst the hundreds of clans within the two tribes of Banu Aus and Banu Khazraj that did not have a single munafiq, not a single munafiq, was Banu Abdul Ashal. So therefore, it's narrated in the history, Lam yakun fi Bani Abdul Ashal. This is the narration by Muhammad ibn Ishaq. He says, Lam yakun fi Bani Abdul Ashal munafiq wala munafiqatun yu'alam. There was not a single munafiq man or a munafiq woman who was known except for one person. Illa anna al-Dhahak bin Thabit. One person. But he also was not known to be a munafiq. There was just some suspicion about him. Kana yuttahamu bin nifaq. He was accused of being a munafiq, and that was not because of there was any apparent reason. It was because hubbi yahudi haula. He had a lot of close friendship and acquaintanceship with the Yahud. And so that raised suspicions amongst the Ansar that he may be from the Munafiqun. But the reality is that he was among the Sahaba. Okay? But it was enough for you to have friendship with the Yahud to be considered a Munafiq. Now, based on that criteria, how many of us would qualify as munafiqun? Huh? It's ajib. You see, having friendship is one thing. Having acquaintanceship because, they work with you in the office is another thing altogether. That's one thing. But bringing them close to you, making them a part of your life, right? When they're hostile to Allah and His Rasul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was here at this time, they would not be on his side. They would be on the side of those people who would be conspiring to kill him and hurt him. Why would you bring them in your house? Right? Yes, there are good people amongst them. Yes, there are people who are very soft-hearted amongst them. Yes, all that. But when you have to draw the line, you have to draw the line. Most of us don't understand that. And this is why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that there's two things that bear the sign of a true believer. Number one is hub fillah, and number two is bughd fillah. Hub fillah is love for Allah, and bughd fillah is to dislike for the sake of Allah. These two things have to be together in order for the iman to be complete. These are two main components. So you sit down and you pray do a lot of dhikr and pray a lot of salawat and recite a lot of Quran. That's good, but that's hub fillah only. What about the bughd fillah part? Right? Both of these have to go together. People will do this, but on the other hand, they have all these other things with it, right? That makes them, according to this criteria, suspicious, like in terms of their iman, in terms of their, are they munafiq or not? Okay, anyhow. Also, in the battle of Uhud, one more virtue. In the battle of Uhud, Hamza Radiallahu Anhu was killed. The uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many people from the clan of Banu Abdul Ashal were also martyred, became shaheed. So, the women, after the battle of Uhud was over, from the clan of Banu Abdul Ashal came, they saw some of the martyrs from their clan, and the women started crying. Now, this was before crying out loud, like wailing, was banned and prohibited in Islam. At that time it was. Afterwards, remember, it's in the third year of Hijri. It's still Islam is still in the developmental stages, right? It's still, the ahkamat are still being revealed. Many new things are being revealed. Many ahkamat are being revealed. So many things were still permissible. that later became impermissible. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard women from Banu Abdul Ashhal crying over their martyrs in the battle of Uhud. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a statement in sadness. He was grief-stricken. So he says, "Lakinna Hamza la bawakiya lahu." But my uncle Hamza, he has nobody to cry over him. Look, these martyrs, they have people to cry over him. But the family of Hamza, they're all sitting in Mecca and most of them haven't accepted Islam. There's no one to cry over him. So he was saying this out of like sadness, right? Out of grief. So Sa'd bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu found out that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this. Either he found out or he heard it himself. In any case, the first thing he did was, he came to the women who were crying from his clan of Banu Abdul Ashhal, and he took them, he said, go to the doorstep of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is after they arrived in Medina Munawwara. Go to his doorstep and start crying for Hamza. Like loud. So he can hear that Hamza is not alone, Radiallahu anhu. He has a family. He's not a martyr who died without a family. There's a family here who loved him just as much as they loved his own martyrs, and they will cry over him. Right? Like he is their own family. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard this, he opened the door and he sees these women sitting there and crying for Hamza radiallahu anhu. So فَدَعَا لَهُنَّ, he made dua for them. And then he said, go back. Go home. Right? After that, it became a tradition amongst the Ansar. فَلَمْ تَبْكَ إِمْرَأَةٌ مِّنَ الْأَنصَارِ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ إِلَى الْيَوْمِ على ميت إلا بدأت بالبكاء على حمزة ثم بكت على ميتها. It became a tradition amongst the Ansar. If anybody died amongst the Ansar, before they were allowed to cry over their own deceased member of the family, they first cried over Hamza radiallahu anh. Subhanallah. Can you imagine the level of love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Right? That Rasulullah said this one thing and they held on to it. That he was so sad that, you know what? We're never going to let this happen again. We're never going to let him feel that sadness ever again. From now on, anybody dies from our own family, first person we're going to cry over is Hamza radiallahu anh, then over our deceased member. That tells you that they gave Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam higher rank than they gave even to themselves. They loved him more than they loved themselves. Otherwise, when somebody in your family dies, your father dies, your mother dies, your family member dies, the first person you think of is the family member who passed away. Who thinks of somebody else from somebody else's family? But they thought of Hamza radiallahu anhu first, which tells you their connection with Rasulullah was greater than even their love for themselves. Allahu Akbar. So this is Banu Abdul Ashhal. Okay? Now, going back to Abbad Bin-Bishr radiallahu anhu. So does anybody know when the Qibla was changed from Baytul Maqdis to Kaaba? Because we know from the beginning, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray, even though there's a difference of opinion on this, but generally speaking, historically, it is mentioned that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray Salah in Makkah Mukarramah, he used to pray towards Baytul Maqdis. But he used to pray towards Baytul Maqdis in such a way that he could pray towards Kaaba at the same time. Now that requires Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pray towards Kaaba in such a way that he had to be standing behind Hadhrat Aswad. Because if he was standing behind any other corner, then he wouldn't be praying towards Baytul Maqdis. He had to be praying with Hadhrat Aswad almost directly in front of him, and then he would have Baytul Maqdis in front of him. So we know when he was praying his fara'id, which way he was praying. On the side of Hadhrat Aswad. Because on the opposite side of Hadhrat Aswad is Rukn Shami. Rukn Shami means Sham. The corner that's facing Sham. Right? Sham means what they know, the academics call it the Levant. Right? It refers to all of modern day Syria, Jordan, that area. Right? Which includes modern day Palestine as well. We don't believe in Israel, right? We believe in Palestine. Right? There's no Israel. There's Palestine. So, modern day Palestine. So anyways, but when Rasulullah ﷺ came to Medina Munawwara, he no longer was able to do that any longer because of the location of Medina Munawwara. It was impossible. Right? He could put the Kaaba in front of him while he's in Makkah Mukarramah and pray towards Bayt al-Maqdis. There's no Kaaba in Medina Munawwara. He has to pray one way or the other because Kaaba was directly almost south while Sham and Bayt al-Maqdis was directly north. So there's no way he could do what he did before. So now Rasulullah ﷺ was always longing for changing the Qibla. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that he would look upwards to the sky, waiting for revelation to come down, telling him you can change your Qibla towards Kaaba. That went on for 16 to 17 months until after migration to Medina Munawwara. So for 16 to 17 months after migration, he was praying towards Bayt al-Maqdis until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the order, you can now pray towards Kaaba. Now, when he prayed towards Kaaba, where was he at the time in Medina Munawwara, and which salah was he praying at the time? Okay? So there's a whole discussion about this in the books of fiqh and history. So I'm going to go through that because it mentions a lot about Abbad Bin-Bishr in it. Okay? And it tells you a lot about his relationship with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does anybody know where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given the order to change the Qibla? Where was it? It's obvious. Everybody should know that. Masjid-e-Qiblatain. The masjid are the two Qiblas. But where was that? So that was the tribe of Banu Salama. That's the tribe of Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu. Rasulullah was there at the time because there is a Sahabi. His name was Bara ibn Ma'rur radiallahu. Great Sahabi from the tribe of Banu Salama, clan of Banu Salama rather. So Banu Salama, Bara ibn Ma'rur radiallahu died. He passed away. His mother or his daughter invited Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to come and join in lunch. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and he had lunch at her house, and then he prayed the Salatul Janazah of Bara ibn Ma'rur radiallahu anh, and Zuhr time came in. Okay? He was praying his Zuhr, had only completed 2 rak'ahs, and the order came. Now, since Bayt al-Maqdis is the complete opposite direction if you're in Medina Munawwara from Makkah Mukarramah, that basically meant that you had to not just turn around, you actually had to physically walk to the other side of the masjid. Because it was the opposite, north to south. So basically the women had to stand in the position where the Imam was previously. The Imam had to move to the position where the women were previously. Complete opposite direction. Okay, somebody says, can you really make that kind of movement while you're praying salah? That's like a lot of movement. And obviously to make sure you don't hit anybody on the way while you're moving, you got to be looking around a little bit too. So was that all happening while they were praying salah? So I mentioned in one of the sessions previously, there's a lot of things that were allowed in Islam previously that were not allowed later on. Okay? As ayahs were revealed, as ahkamat were revealed, the rulings became more and more restrictive. But in the beginning, when it came to salah, there's a lot of things that you could do in salah. And one of them was amal kathir. You could move around a little bit more than you can now. Right? Right now, you move a little bit too much, your salah will break. In fact, according to Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, if a person looking at you praying assumes that you're not praying because you're fiddling with your hands or you're doing something, and he thinks you're doing something else, right? Then it'll be considered that your salah is broken. So the observation of a third person looking at one person praying salah, saying that he's not praying, is proof that this person is not praying his salah. Because he's just doing such things that doesn't look like he's praying. So he could be like, sometimes if people are praying their salah and they just get busy like looking at their hands, and he's like, checking the palms, or he may be like cracking his knuckles, and he's looking down at it, and somebody looking is thinking like, mashallah, he seems to be very, focused on his hands and stuff, not knowing that he's praying his salah. supposed to be praying his salah, right? So anyhow, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam changed, that when the Qibla changed, he moved around all the way, and the women went on the opposite side. And Abbad bin Bishr was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time, and the proof of that is a hadith. We're going to go through that hadith right now. خرج عباد بن بشر رضي الله عنه وكان صلى مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He had prayed salah, the first salah that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم prayed facing from Baytul Maqdis to Kaaba was Dhuhr salah. Abbad bin Bishr was with him at the time. So فمر على قوم من الأنصار. After the salah was complete, he turned around, left sometime later, and he passed by a clan from Banu Khazraj called Banu Harisa bin Khazraj. He passed by them. These people are to the north. This clan was to the north of Medina Munawwara on the way to Uhud. So he passed by them. وَهُمْ رَاكِعُونَ فِي صَلَاةِ الْعَصْرِ. They were in ruku', praying Salatul Asr. And he called out to them. He said, Ashhadu billah, I bear witness by Allah, لَقَدْ صَلَّيْتُ مَعَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. I prayed salah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam just now, قِبْلَ الْبَيْتِ, towards the house of Allah, Kaaba, in Makkah Mukarramah. And at that very moment, the whole Jama'at, the congregation, turned around. فَاسْتَدَارُوا, they all turned around. Okay? And so the same thing happened here that happened with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Masjid Qiblatain. All turned around. So, and this is a hadith of Bukhari, not this hadith. There's another hadith which mentions that a man came out to Banu Harisa bin Khazraj. That man was Abbad bin Bishr, as this hadith clearly indicates. Now what's interesting here is that Abbad bin Bishr was not from the clan of Banu Salama. What was he doing far away from his own clan, Banu Abdul Ashal, except for him accompanying Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the moment to attend the janazah and be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which tells you his closeness to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was with him at the time and attended the janazah and then prayed dhuhr with him, and then the 2 rakahs of dhuhr were towards Baytul Maqdis, 2 rakahs were so he was there throughout that whole thing. And then he was a person who came out and started informing people as he passed by at least one of the masajid. He may have passed by more masajid, and let them know, listen, you're praying the wrong way. The hukum has changed. Right? His own clan of Banu Abdul Ashal did not find out about the change of the Qibla until the next day, Fajr. And that's when Rasulullah sent out a messenger to inform the people of Masjid Quba and Banu Abdul Ashal and others. What was Abbad bin Bishr doing? He didn't go back to his clan and tell them, listen, the Qibla has changed. Most likely, he did not tell them because he was not there with them, because he was spending most of his time with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? These are all kind of indications. We don't have clear proof, but we know he was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Masjid Qiblatain, and most likely he was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout that time, all the way to next Fajr, that even his own clan is not aware that the Qibla has changed, and he knows, and he's prayed Rasulullah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam one whole day before almost. Dhuhr Salah. The previous day he had prayed with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam towards Kaaba Sharif. So it just tells you his connection with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's another hadith of Bara. We're going to go over that inshallah next week, and we'll continue this story of Abbad bin Bishr and the Qibla change next week inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair, ahsan al-jazaa. There's a hadith of Bukhari narrated by Bara ibn Azim that tells us that the first salah that was prayed towards Kaaba after 16, 17 months after migration was not Salatul Dhuhr, it was Salatul Asr. Okay, so because of that there's some confusion about which salah was it, Dhuhr or was it Asr. So inshallah we'll talk about that and about Abbad bin Bishr radiallahu anhu in relation to that next week. Jazakumullah khair, ahsan al-jazaa.